So good morning, everyone. I'm going to wait just another minute or two for Ian to join us. He was got the info, the Zoom information late, and so I think he's coming in. And Ian, if you can hear us, we can see the placeholder for you, but we can't see your video or your audio. And we continue to be silent on that. Yep, he's gone. Sydney, are you managing the people coming in and out?
Yeah, I'll make sure I'll add him back in once he joins.
Okay. I suspect he's probably had to go and reboot his computer or something like that. The challenges and joys of technology. I would like to, so I'm going to, before we start the meeting, I'm going to let you know that we are going to ask Julie to say a few words to kick off the meeting, and I would like to wait a minute or two for Ian to join us. So we will get into the call to order and other things in just a few minutes. And just giving in a minute or two more to solve his connection issues. There he is. Good morning, Ian.
Good morning. Sorry about that. I'm struggling with a little technology this morning, but
Okay.
Good morning.
morning.
So, good morning, all. I would like to take the opportunity to call this planning committee meeting to order at 10:06 on Friday morning, the 29th. And the first order in the agenda is for a declaration of pecuniary interest. So I would ask for either a nod or a shake, letting me know if you have any issues of a declaration of pecuniary interest.
No.
Not seeing any, I will then suggest that we're going to introduce a change in the agenda sequence here before we go to the adoption of the agenda. Our acting CEO, Julie, has asked if she can share a few words with us. And so, Julie, I would like to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelton and Chair. And through you, I'm starting to make a habit of this. So I just wanted to say good morning to everybody, and a great big thanks for being on the committee because council and staff really find the information discussed at this table invaluable. We've heard that there were concerns about what's on the agenda today, and to put it bluntly, who's driving the bus? The short answer is that we're attempting a coordinated approach. So a coordination between council's direction, staff, which includes our hired consultants, and staff's interpretation of council priorities, and the planning committee chair, Councillor Hazelton. Not all attempts are successful, and I value the comments received that staff created the agenda with what would be labeled low priority or low impact subjects. We apologize for missing that cue. In an attempt to improve, Chair Hazelton, Mayor Couture, Director Espala, Clerk Way, and I met to discuss. And moving forward, we're going to attempt an alternative approach. So we will be requesting in section 6 of the agenda, where we like clarity on resolutions for council through the committee of the whole, that we this committee proposed topics for the subsequent meeting, and then council, as per the terms of reference of this committee, will have the authority to accept, modify, or reject the recommendations. So in short, we look forward to this discussion today, and we will, with your recommendation, have subjects that are more in line with your interest and expertise at the next and following meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. I would also, as we look at the agenda, I think everybody has a copy of it. Previously, the item following topics of discussion has been new business, but what I have been led to understand is that rather than having new items where our committee terms of reference really doesn't allow us to talk about new items, what Julie has just covered here is the resolutions of a committee of whole, for the committee of the whole or for council. Those resolutions are really our opportunity as a planning committee to provide input to council on what we feel we should be discussing and the sense of urgency for those topics. And so rather than introducing new business items for discussion of this meeting, what we end up doing is providing a resolution that goes back to council in some form, committee of the whole or council meeting, whatever, and that those recommendations for topics of discussion are then considered and then sent back to us. So that's why the item number 6 is not new business, it is resolutions for committee of the whole. So with that explanation, hopefully everybody has a copy of the agenda, understands that difference at the end. May I have someone move to adopt the agenda as presented? Moved by Bill, seconded by Ian, and all in favor? And carried. Okay, hang on one sec here. So doing this off the seat of my pants, I've forgotten what Sydney sent me. Okay, next, in the minutes, or in the agenda package, we have the minutes from the March 25th meeting, and presumably everyone has had an opportunity to consider and review those. Are there any errors or omissions that we need to consider in the minutes? Beth.
Thank you, Chair Hazelton. I would just, and I have mentioned this before, as minutes are recording, is it would be very handy when, right now, for instance, the minutes say committee said this or committee suggested that. Committee to me means the majority of the committee, and that's not what I'm seeing reflected in the minutes that are before you. I see a particular member of a committee introduce the items that are on today's agenda, but that was not the consensus of the general committee, if you will. I think perhaps it could be in the future saying one member or the majority of the members recommended this or suggested that. And I think that's important. And I also think it's important later when we start discussing, as you suggest, new future items, that when an issue is raised for a potential topic for discussion, that maybe there is some general show of hands if that is something that the entire committee wants to address. You know, there may be more important items that the majority want to address rather than particular items that one wants to address. So I'm just making that comment as it reflects in the minutes, that it's not exactly conveying the correct information.
So I see that our clerk has turned her video on, which usually means she wants to say something. At least that's been a pattern in the past. So Karen, would you like to address Beth's comments?
Certainly.
Sydney probably has to put herself on mute during talks.
Part of this was already addressed by Julie's comments and Councillor Hazelton's comments earlier about the agenda topic in general, and understanding your concern that you feel it was addressed from one member of the committee versus the committee as a whole. The minutes are not reflective necessarily of today's agenda, but we have to record the minutes. without note or comment, right? So they're not verbatim. They're not meant to recognize one person over another. They're meant to be a summary. And that's why we do have the very clear recommendations moving forward that we're hoping to have. We have a template ready to go for today. So clear items will be outlined and voted upon at today's meeting. So moving forward, we can capture accurately. And I don't think that's necessarily a reflection of the minutes, but perhaps a misunderstanding of communication about where today's agenda items came from. I hope that provides clarification and hope that this will be resolved moving forward.
So Karen, is there a way to essentially to reflect what Beth has suggested, which is, and I think one of the things that minutes do in an organization like ours is going forward, somebody in the future might read the minutes and say, oh, what Beth commented on, like the whole committee versus, you know, one person or whatever. There may be value in trying to include some of Beth's recommendation here, so that I'm less interested in one versus many and more interested in you know, where the recommendations are coming from, because in the future that will provide context for people who are trying to understand what was going on in the meeting. And I don't think everybody is interested in going back to the video and watching the video to see all the details. So you know, there's some sort of a hybrid between the minute taking and a video, and the minute taking that may be a little bit more clear as we go forward as to, you know, who's saying what and what the messages are. Is that helpful?
You're asking me if it would be helpful? Absolutely.
No, sorry, I'm asking Karen if
Well, it would
if
address my
possible.
raised, Council.
So the recommendations are where we take our direction from. That is the record, not necessarily verbatim of who said what. The video is not a record of the meeting per the Municipal Act, and it is merely a convenience that is provided. I hope that provides some clarification as to why actions are taken the way they are. And this is why it's important, and why we've had discussions surrounding how those recommendations should be worded moving forward to make sure there's a very clear message.
Bill.
Sorry, I guess I'm definitely in agreement with what Beth is suggesting and your comments, Mr. Chair. When I read these, you know, what sort of caught my eye was at the bottom of what page is it? 3, I guess. You know, it sort of made the statement that you know, committee doesn't think that the site plan control process is required, you know, where a development application or building permit complies with all zoning bylaw provisions. You know, when you read that in the minutes, it like Beth suggested, it sounds like there's a committee consensus about that. I know that was suggested, or that comment was made, and you know, not to belabor the point, I think we really must try and come up with something, you know, not absolute. I don't think we need names, but you know, why can't we, you know, just say a member said, or a member suggested, or, you know, some members suggested, you know, and reserve the statement committee when we've sort of reached a majority or a consensus kind of position. Like, I think we all kind of look back at these minutes to sort of remember what we, you know, they kind of tell us what you know, where we got to, and just reading it this way, it's somewhat misleading. Like, you know, in that particular example, you know, I think there was some suggestions that if things meet building, you know, building permit requirements, maybe site plan is not required. But you know, just in the 6 Mile Lake context, I think we're coming to the point where there's discussion about expanding, let's say, permissions for GFA, and to the extent that that happens, then fewer applications go through a variance process. Few of them are subject to some kind of review about what's happening on the shoreline in terms of naturalization and you know, visual impact. So you know, I don't want to get into arguing that point, but from my point of view, that's very much a comment or a position. You know, there's been some suggestions about it, but I don't think there's anywhere near a majority or a consensus on that kind of position about where we're going with site plan control. So I would really strongly urge, if we can, to, you know, to use some more nuanced language in the minutes, you know, a member, several members suggested, that kind of thing. I agree we don't need specific names. Anyway, sorry to belabor the point.
Aaron, can I ask you that we either set up a meeting to discuss how we can do this differently, or something like that, because the feeling I'm getting from the comments that have come out is that anybody reading the minutes as they have been reported would be misled in understanding what really took place at the meeting. And I'm sure that's not intent, but that's observation. So how do we go about discussing and getting, like, we don't take a lot of time in this meeting, but how do we go about getting to a different place where the minutes can be more reflective and someone can pick up and read the minutes and say, okay, I have a reasonable understanding of what took place, because I think what I'm hearing is that these minutes don't reflect that.
Certainly, I believe me, staff have heard the message. We understand what you're asking for. We do still need to balance it with our obligations under the Municipal Act. And as we've already discussed earlier this week, ensuring that our resolutions contain more information is really the most effective way for us to move forward with this. There's nothing we can do about the minutes retroactively. They were captured how they were. The resolutions maybe weren't as in-depth as maybe should have been, or would have been more reflective of the decisions of committee at the time. So we're going to make sure that that's happening moving forward. And we, as you know, Chair Hazelton, we have resolutions prepped for this afternoon that we've discussed with you previously this week. And hopefully that'll be the best way moving forward to capture that information that seems to be wanted by the committee.
Okay, so just one point of clarification. We do have an opportunity right now, as we're discussing the minutes, to amend the minutes. And so that may be a process we want to execute, or we may want to let it slide. I'll just leave it up to members to weigh in on this matter. Beth.
I was going to ask the question, do we have to adopt the minutes? Why don't we just not adopt them? Because we're not going to waste time here amending them. We just don't adopt them as printed. And if the clerk wants to come back with the minutes to the next meeting, that's fine, to reflect what we're requesting here.
May I ask, is the concern enough to a point where it's detrimental in this committee moving forward with current recommendations coming out of today and future meetings? Because if it's not, then it might not be worth fighting over some, you know, saying several members or one member. Is that enough for this one particular item to warrant, or is this something that you don't want them adopted and we can bring them back next time? Keeping in mind, we can't amend what those resolutions were, which is really where the main direction should have come from.
I guess I'm just following up on Member Winterhalt's comment that one related to his remark is not reflective of what we discussed. I won't be supporting the adoption of the minutes.
Bill, yes?
Well, I mean, if it comes down to it, I mean, I would suggest that at the bottom of page 3, where it starts to say committees stated that they do not think and so on, I would say some members stated that they do not think the intent. Like, I think that's one's important enough to clarify it. If I look at the two preceding it, I think there's a general sense that there's confusion about the site plan process, and certainly I wouldn't disagree that the majority probably thought there were concerns regarding enforcement and so on. So, like, I think it's up to the, I'm willing to say on that particular one, I think it needs clarification. If other people think that, I mean, there's only there's only 5 or 6 statements about in here. Like if others think that any of the others are seriously out of whack by just stating committee said so and such, I think that's the point of asking for corrections to the minutes. So I would certainly request that the one I just mentioned read some members stated, or some equivalent to that.
Okay, thank you. Beth, did you want to weigh in again?
I was just going to say, I read in the minutes that the priority items were what was to come back to this committee, and that's not what's on this agenda today. So I think the minutes are not reflecting our actions, and I do appreciate what the acting CAO said at the outset of the meeting. Thank you for that, Julie.
Sydney, can you take note to make that one edit?
Yeah, so I'll make the amendments to the minutes and I'll change some of the wording around. If you don't think that something was captured at the meeting, I can make those amendments and add. I don't know if you have any specific suggestions on something that you don't think was captured, but.
Not at this point. I think we just need to move on to our agenda and potentially some other topics at the end.
Are there any other errors or omissions that people would like to discuss? There being none, can I have a mover to adopt the minutes as amended? Jack? And seconder, Paul Wienko, Councillor Wienko. All in favor? Thank you, carried. Okay. Next on the agenda is topics of discussion, and the topic that was put on this agenda from Dr. Aspala is the Planning Committee discussion topic of reflected in his Development Services report. So Dr. Aspala, would you like to take us through your report?
Thank you, Chair Hazelton. I have a brief presentation on the report. So if I can share my screen, I'll do so.
You should be able to share your screen now.
Okay, thank you. Can everybody see my PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Very good. Okay, so Jason will be in and out of this meeting. He's on the road in Northern Ontario with sporadic cell coverage. So one of the other staff, Tori Ruck, will be joining us also. So I'll be giving the presentation. So our topic for today is going to be docks, ramps, and freestanding decks. And we're looking for input and guidance from the expertise of the committee to help us with some background on this. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about are our official plan policies and our zoning policies, and then with the intention of getting into some discussion. And I have some questions which I want to ask the committee. So in our official plan, we have policies with respect to private docks, and the official plan provides policy triggers for our zoning bylaw, and the zoning bylaw goes into greater detail with those. You can see the slide. I'm not going to read it for everybody, but the issues are related to interaction between land-based features and water-based features and activities that may take place on the water. We also have official plan policies that deal with shoreline structures, the whole gamut of them, whether they're docks, boathouses, boat ports, decks, gazebos, etc., and the impacts that they have on the water and the natural heritage. and what I'll call the natural urban design. So that's the appearance, the visual impact on anybody who has to look at the properties, whether they're navigating on a vessel or whether they're looking at a property from their own property. So our official plan provides high level details about the size of the shoreline structures, and the more detailed specifications are in the zoning bylaw, which I'll touch on momentarily. So there's some key definitions in our zoning bylaw, and dock, pretty straightforward. The ramp and the definition of ramp is one that causes a bit of a pain point for our department, because of there seems to be a number of interpretations, and it may be the actual implementation of the zoning bylaw or perceived interpretation by agents representing property owners or property owners themselves. I want to touch on that a little later on in our discussion today. And then the other aspect is a freestanding deck, and that's not intended to be part of a dock system where you may have a dock and a ramp, and they serve their own purpose. People enjoy it being out in the nice weather on their deck, and that's the intention for them. So I look forward to having some discussion on this in a bit. So we have two policies in our zoning bylaw that cover or provide provisions with respect to docks, ramps, and boat lifts. The discussion today is mainly, I'm hoping, is mainly going to be around docks and ramps. So 4.1.13.2 is actually a quite detailed policy that involves, as you can see looking at this presentation excerpt of it, there's a lot of numbers in there. There's a lot of calculations that are involved. There's a lot of different types of docks and dock patterns that are involved that we have. So some of the feedback that we're hearing is that this policy is a bit complicated to, or these provisions of the zoning bylaw are a bit complicated to interpret, and at times take a lot of time to interpret on each property. So there may be opportunity that we wish to consider through a waterfront policy review. Is there a better way of doing our dock and ramp policies so that we can make it easier for both applicants, their agents, and township administration to implement the policies? So we can talk about that a little more in the discussion section of our meeting today. So a couple of questions as starters for our discussion that I'd like to put out to the committee. We have stairs that may be on their own from a property that go down to a dock, and there have been some different interpretations of how these stair policies or provisions can be interpreted. How can we improve them? So I'm looking for guidance from the committee today. What can we do to improve them? What are your thoughts? What are your suggestions? The other question that I have for starters is, should we be treating stairs that go down to a dock similar to ramps in our zoning bylaw? And I can pull up, or I can share a screen with our zoning bylaw provisions so that the committee can see them specifically to aid in our discussion as we talk about these. And I'm also open to other related questions about docks and ramps and decks. So anything related to 4.1.13.2 and 4.1.13.3 in our zoning bylaw. So I can have that up on the screen. I can share the screen with that information for you. Because operationally, they are a bit of a pain point for our planning department in terms of interpreting them. And I think there's opportunity to improve these policies through our waterfront policy review. So with that being said, I'd like to conclude the presentation and turn it back to Chair Hazelton for questions and discussions from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Aspola. Could you also stop sharing your screen? I think we all have the wording in the bylaws in the agenda package. So we're just, I guess, with screen sizes and resolutions, it's often challenging to have that. Having said that, one comment that has circulated around is, are there examples of problem areas with these bylaws that you can share with us, images or whatever, where you're wrestling with these as problem areas that would help foster discussion? Because based on your presentation, I'm certainly not getting a clear idea as to what problem you're trying to solve, other than the wording is complex and it's a big job. But we know that building anything is a complex task and lots of measurements and criteria. So is there something you could offer that would help? Or I see Armin, you have some comments on this?
Sure. I wasn't expecting. I had some challenges. My mother's quite ill and didn't get a chance to really apply myself to this until last night and this morning. But I did prepare a little bit of supplementary information that I'm not as techy as everybody, so I can't share my screen. I did send it to you, Mr. Chair, and I sent it to planning and to Sydney, I believe. But it might be useful to share that screen if it's available. I don't think it was on your councillor agenda, Chair Hazelton. I think it was your personal one. Or your address, I mean.
I have it. I can share my screen.
Okay, great.
Okay. You just have to give me one moment so I can pull it up.
Sure.
Can you see the Word document?
Yeah, I think that's what I'm talking about.
Make the text bigger, Sydney? Zoom in.
I can read it's a couple of pages here. I can read it out and I think it'll be self-evident if you don't have to be following along if you don't want to. But one of the basic observations that is not captured in this document is that since 2014 75 bylaw was adopted in 2014, there was a Schedule D at the back that is provided. The previous planning consultant that prepared all of this information for us in 2014 and before. Spent a fair bit of time collecting drawings. I know our company volunteered, and as did others, to provide some kind of sketches to provide context to the problems and the challenges that we have. And that there are a lot of sketches at the back that illustrate various dock configurations and so forth. And at the bottom of each page, it says that basically these aren't to be included as part of the bylaw. Well, I would submit that you would solve a lot of problems if we review those drawings and make sure that they're accurate and that they reflect what's intended in the bylaw, the provisions in the bylaw and the official plan, that those sketches should be included as part of the bylaw. because they provide a lot of clarity when a picture is 1,000 words kind of thing. And if you go back to that, it would be much simpler to be able to, for new planning staff, and we've had a considerable turnover, which is a topic for another day. But there's been a considerable turnover in planning staff over the last decade or better. And one of the reasons I think is that it's a tough job. That there's a lot to interpret here. It's very confusing, as Dr. Aspola mentioned. And I think when you're training new staff, there's not one section in the bylaw that you can go to and say, okay, here's all the provisions for docs. You got to turn pages and get confused. And even people who have read them many times have to go back and review them. So I would submit that if we spent a bit of time revising as needed, the sketches at the back of the bylaw in the Schedule D section and making them accurate to everyone's satisfaction, that would be an amazing planning tool in being able to facilitate a lot of this stuff. But I'm just going to read this document that we put on screen. Some current challenges with our zoning bylaw as it pertains to docks, ramp, and shore-based freestanding decks are as listed as follows. The dynamic nature of our Georgian Bay water levels causes fluctuations in water level up to 1.8 meters. The current dock, ramp, and shoreline provisions are inadequate. Dock and dock ramp provisions should be amended to allow for safe pedestrian access between the docks, a dock or docks, and shore to a point on shore that's safe from flooding during high water periods. In 2014, zoning bylaw 2475 established new setbacks and regulations governing freestanding decks in shoreline areas, and I believe that some of these changes caused unintended consequences. Previous to 2014, a freestanding deck was allowed to be up to 40 meters square. So it's about 460 square feet. That's what that translates into in size, and could be built onshore or at shore, which provided a safe transition from docks to dry shoreline, regardless of the water elevation. The shore deck, as we used to call them, also provided an extremely robust point of connection for docks and ramps, vitally important to secure docks built in a hostile marine environment, like the windy shores of Georgian Bay. With the new regulations in 2014-75, freestanding decks must be behind or above the high water mark of 177.4 in Honey Harbor and 6 meters back from that point of land upland from the 177.4 in Cognachine, Go Home Bay, and Wawatasi. As a result, the opportunity for a safe and robust transition between dock and shore was lost. In my opinion, new shore deck definition and provision should be implemented to instate the vital connection between dock and a dry shoreline. I believe new shore deck definition and provision can be implemented with the maximum width and area restrictions to avoid unintended consequences. And by that, I mean, I think that the general concern about shore decks was, it's 460 square feet. It can be a pretty imposing structure in certain applications. And I think that still applies because particularly in Cognachine and North, where these shore decks have to be 5 meters back from the high water mark, well, the land creeps up. The further back you go, the higher the land goes. And we've talked about this before. And the unintended consequence of that, I believe, in Cognachine and North, I know there was one of considerable concern in Go Home Bay that was built where it was a pretty big shore deck. And I believe that shore deck was required to be moved back. And as a result of the provision that the no point of the shore deck can be more than 1.2 meters above natural grade, they had to create almost like a bleacher effect where they step back like giant stairs, basically, to a point where, it was getting too high. Then they had to step down to the next elevation and so on. So you're going to end up with a very imposing structure you can build as a matter of right 5 meters back from the shore. I think there's a better way to do that. I propose that a new shore deck provision and definition should be instated to provide the appropriate dock shore pedestrian transition that extends the allowable overall projection of a dock or ramp under the following provisions and restrictions. Suggestions for dock amendments. In order to better illustrate the various dock, ramp, boathouse, and freestanding deck scenarios, the illustrations should be properly reviewed and amended to really actual permitted uses. And, or I think there's a typo there. Installations should form part of the bylaw. The drawings are much easier to interpret than the various written dock-related provisions, and if Schedule D was included in the bylaw, it would alleviate all confusion. This is what I talked about initially. Dock definitions. The way that the docks are currently described, I think falls short of what the description should be, and I've suggested the following terms might be used. So in a first situation, that a dock can be affixed to the lake bottom or river bottom, as is the case with a crib dock or a pole dock, or something that's pile driven into the soil. You can have a dock can mean a floating dock on the water. A dock can mean a dock that's suspended over the water, as is the case with some of these suspension docks that you see in areas where it's impossible to anchor it to the lake bottom. And then I think any combination of 1, 2, or 3 above should be considered a dock. Attached to the shoreline or attached to the shoreline littoral zone. And by means of a fixed or hinged ramp or a solid dock or ramp. And for the, I think that the description needs to be changed for the purpose of mooring vessels and other marine-based equipment, and providing safe access between the water and a point or elevation on shore above the highest dynamic water level, typical for the body of water on which it is constructed. Number 3, the dock projection means the distance of a dock, combination of docks or docks and dock ramps extending between the water's edge and a water depth sufficient to provide proper operating depth for the boat for which the dock is intended. For dock ramp is defined as a ramp or a boardwalk that is provided safe pedestrian access between the shore and the dock, or a combination of docks, or a dock and a dock and a shore deck or freestanding deck on shore. The shore deck is a structure built on land that provides safe access between the dock, combination of docks, dock ramps extending between the water's edge and that point or elevation of land that is safe from flooding during the conditions, high water conditions. I believe that the definition of a ramp should be changed to allow a ramp connection from shore to a shore deck, to a dock, or to a ramp, or from shore to a dock, or from a dock to dock. Right now, I know that there's been some confusion, and I've discussed it in the earlier meetings, where right now the only way that you're allowed to connect a dock with a ramp is to the shore. And in many cases, as if you drive around Georgian Bay, you'll see that traditionally crib docks were the primary source of attaching the dock to the lake bed. And so many of these crib docks still exist in one form or another. Some have been replaced with solid, docks that have steel cribs, or they're pile driven into the lake bottom. And then if the water goes down, what typically happens is people go and buy a dock ramp, a hinged ramp, to connect to that crib dock, and then connect it to another dock, or floating dock that you put on the end. And right now, under the current provisions, the ramp definition does not permit that use. You can only connect a ramp to a dock on shore. It can't be connected to another deck, can't be connected to a shore deck or another dock, which has caused problems in the past for approving various dock applications, and some of which I've been involved in. So I apologize. I think something got lost in the translation on this document that I sent, and I'll resend a better one. But I believe that one of the main things that's wrong with the situation the way it is right now is we've got limits, a 60 foot, 66 foot, or 20 meter limit to the projection of the dock from the water's edge, or they called it the current water level. And as we all know, the water levels change from one day to the next, or even within the same day sometimes if there's a high wind. So what happens is you may need all of your 66 feet of dock under ideal conditions, and in less than ideal conditions, when the water level is higher, you may get wet feet going from the end of your 66-foot dock, which used to be at the current water level, but is no longer at that level. And so you need boots to get from there to the shore. What I'm suggesting is that we should instate a new definition called a shore deck. And that shore deck, you could rob the available square footage from the 40 square meter freestanding deck, which is currently allowed in most jurisdictions within the township, and that shore deck should have limitations in width. And my suggestion is that it should be at a minimum 6 feet wide to provide safe access, even for wheelchairs and people who are having access challenges. And that at a maximum, it should be no more than 10 feet or 3 meters in width. And and it could extend beyond your 66 feet of alignment, or 86 feet is the case in Honey Harbor. And it's basically like a boardwalk that would connect from the end of your dock to a place on shore that's going to be dry regardless of high water or not. And that and I've proposed this once before a few years ago in planning, where you've got this 460 square foot available freestanding deck provision. And what I'm saying is that if you do agree that this shore deck is a viable way to get to shore when you sometimes have to get wet feet, that you would rob from the 460 square feet that's available. So if you don't have a 460 square foot deck and you just want to get from your dock to a dry place on land, you can build something up to 10 feet wide as a boardwalk to get to a higher place where you've always got safe access to the shore. But you're not allowed to build that 460 square foot deck any longer. If you're only extending it by 100 or 200 square feet, then you would reduce the 460 square feet by that 200 square feet, and then you can build a smaller freestanding deck if you need one. So I think that would cause a lot of, solve a lot of problems that we're having right now, because right now the shoreline of Georgian Bay is so dynamic in the high and low water conditions, that especially since 2013, when the water was at an all-time low, and then 2 years ago when it was at an all-time high, there were lots of places where people had to reconfigure their docks. And so I believe this could resolve the issue. I think the concern about freestanding decks and the setbacks from the waterfront has been that you don't want to have a 460 foot deck right at the water's edge, because it can be 40 feet wide by 10 feet in the other direction or something. So this way, if you limit it to between 6 and 10 feet wide only, and provide it as a dock extension to shore, it would solve those problems, and you could put a more permanent structure in and build it once and build it right. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to. Sorry for going on so long and for the confusion in my document here, because it was a lot simpler when I originally wrote it. So you're muted, I think.
I saw that my phone rang. I tried to shut the noise off. But anyways, Dr. Spilla, you have your hand up. Would like to say something.
Thank you, Chair Hazelton. I think Member Grigaitis has provided a very good summary of the pain points that our planning department is hearing with respect to concerns or issues that our residents or property owners are experiencing. I think it's a very fair point that he raises. That the drawings or the schedules that you will, if you will, particularly 16 through 18, that deal with docks and decks and ramps, those are not formally part of the zoning bylaw, and from time to time they are overlooked. But these are the issues that when people are applying for decks, that they're having big challenges with, they're expressing their frustration to the planning department about why can't we do this, or how do we do this, or how do we make this calculation. I think we need to find a more customer focused mechanism in our zoning bylaw policies and diagrams to address the issues that have been raised by member Gergaitis in this case. So that doesn't cover all the issues that the planning department would like to touch on today, but I think it's a really good starting point and a very good summary of most of the issues. Thank you.
I open it up to committee members for comment. Wow. Instead of hands flying, I'm not seeing any. Okay, Peter, go ahead. Oh, sorry. Yeah, well, Jack, you'll come after this.
Couple of, first of all, can you hear me? I've got a new gadget going here. We're all right? Okay. I have a dog howling in the background, so I'm trying to minimize that. Terminology, shore deck, is that different than a wharf? A wharf is already a defined structure most places. And I'm always reluctant to come up with new terms, redefining old terms and all that stuff. So I'm not clear on the difference between what a shore deck is supposed to be versus a wharf, number one. And number two, we already have width limits as to how wide you can build things on your shoreline. So adding in limits on how wide a wharf or a shore deck can be, or how narrow or how wide, I wouldn't think it's necessary, in that we already have limits as to how wide you can build your structures down on the waterfront. That's it. Couple comments.
Okay, thanks, Jack. Peter, you had wanted to weigh in.
Yeah, so I'm hearing Armin's proposals for the first time, so I'd like to look at that in more detail and consider them before I comment on them specifically. Couple of things I could throw out for the benefit of the planners. I am a little bit confused as to what, if you have a structure that is attached to the shore, which is then attached to a ramp and to a floating dock, say, it's a little bit confusing to me as to whether that structure on the shore is a deck or part of the dock. And you might have a structure on the shore which in high water years you tie your boat up to directly, which then would meet the definition of a dock, which is being used for mooring of boats. But in a low water year, you can't do that. So it's no longer used for mooring of boats. Does it become something else? So that's an area where I can see it is somewhat problematic. I think from a policy point of view, the concern is the massing of development along the shoreline, obviously. And the issue becomes the combination of the dock, the ramp, and whatever structure the ramp is attached to on the shoreline. And we have clear limits on sizes and shapes of docks and ramps, but no limit on the size of a deck on the shoreline, other than the maximum of 40 square meters, which is a huge deck. So I think that has to be considered. I'm not sure that there is, I realize that in Cognisheen that a deck has to be set back 5 meters from the high water mark. I'm not sure that there's the same provision in Go Home Bay or Wawatasi, but I think the concern is, as I say, the massing. And in addition to that, I think there's also a concern that a deck that is on the shoreline is not going to be used just for access to your dock, but it's going to become a party deck, which I think we clearly don't want to happen. So I think if there is going to be permission for a structure on the shore, which you can attach to a ramp and in turn to a dock, I think we have to, in conjunction with that, put very clear limits on the size of that shore structure. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Okay, sequence of people who are wanting to get in, Armin, Paul, and Jack. Armin.
Thank you. So I'm up. So make sure I'm alive here. Yeah. So Peter, thank you very much for your observations. And I think you've covered, if you do take a look at the bylaw, and maybe Dr. Aspala or one of the other planning staff would be able to help me out, but I believe that the setback for the freestanding decks Go Home Bay is identical to Cognachine, wherein you have to be 5 meters back from the high water mark to be able to build that. And that's my whole point, is that you're already allowed to do that, but do you want to do a big freestanding deck in that location? Because one of my major concerns has always been, as soon as that was implemented in 2014, it precluded the freestanding deck, as we call them now, from providing any connectivity from the dock to the shore. And that's particularly important in areas where it's a shallow sloping shoreline, and when the water comes up, as it often does with the wind or just from year to year, then you have a flooded area beyond the legal limit of your dock that you have to transition. So the reason, and thank you, Jack, for bringing up the point about the wharf, and I agree that's also a very good description. Maybe we can call it a wharf in this proposed change. But I just thought that we would call it a shore deck, because most of the contractors in this area called them shore decks because they were there to provide connectivity to the dock. And I think if you, right now, in Cognachine or in Go Home Bay, I can go and apply for a permit for a dock that's up to 66 feet long from the water's edge, or from the current watermark, as we call it in our description and the definition. And I can apply for a dock that is an L shape, like where it meets the shore. I can build a 13-foot wide dock or deck, whatever you want to call it, right along the edge of the water, as long as I call it a dock. So I think that's why I sort of preemptively suggested that we put if we're going to allow a new description in the bylaw for the shore deck, which is simply to provide that dry and safe connectivity between the high water areas and the dock, that we should put some kind of a limitation on the width there, so that it doesn't become a bigger structure that's going to be obtrusive. And at the same time, if you do put that structure in out of necessity to provide a safe transition to the high water areas, then you're also stealing from your available 40 square meter limit on the freestanding deck. So if you need a really long one, because you have a piece of shoreline that when the water comes up 2 feet, it floods an extra 50 feet, then you'll be able to build this shore deck if it's ever approved and adopted into the bylaw, but you won't be able to build another freestanding deck of 40 square meters. That's why I did it that way. So I don't know if that's clear as mud, but those are the concerns. And as a dock builder, I can tell you that there are a lot of challenges, and I think Dr. Espila has indicated that I'm correct in that assumption, because many people are having these problems. You know, they just want to be able to get to the shore, and they're only allowed so many feet. You can build boardwalks all over your property, but not in the shoreline area, because they won't allow them to be connected to a dock. Oh, that's just ludicrous. We need to be able to have, you know, these days things cost a lot of money in 2022 with the cost of building materials and labor and so forth. Everything has doubled in the last couple of years, by my experience. So when you get to the point where you can afford to do this work, and out of necessity in a lot of cases where the dock's been destroyed, then you want to do it once and do it right. And I believe that this is a way, and I will refine those comments so that they're more easily understood, because I realized in my haste I made some pasting errors. But I think that that's going to be the simplest way to do it and be the least visually obtrusive to your point about massing and so on. And any other questions, I'm happy to clarify.
Thank you, Armin. I'd like to ask Dr. Espilla. I think he wants to bring in one of our consultants who's got specific expertise in this area. Dr. Espilla.
Thank you, Chair Hazelton. Actually, I'd like to bring in Josh Lacaria, who's one of our planners on our team, who has quite a bit of experience working on deck matters. And since right now we're talking about decks, I think he could provide some insight into the conversation. So I'm going to turn this over to Josh right now. And Josh, welcome to the committee. Welcome to Josh. And over to you, Josh.
Good morning. So I first want to state essentially what's in the zoning bylaw. And myself, as planner one with the township, I review the building permit applications that we receive. So I can provide you that I guess methodology of how I review matters related to shore decks or docks and ramps, and how previous planners at the township have also done the same. So first, I want to mention that in the zoning bylaw, we have provisions that address docks and ramps in section 4.1.13 in the general provisions of the zoning bylaw. We have a section that deals with freestanding decks in 4.1.12. And also in section 4 of the zoning bylaw, there are other, applicable provisions that will apply for, let's say, a freestanding deck. And that relates to, for example, the setbacks of the freestanding deck to the side lot lines, right? It is considered a structure, so it does have to comply with the side lot line setbacks. I believe it is 4.1.7. Now, depending on the zone of the property, depending on the community that the property is in, it also needs to follow the specific zone requirements for that particular lot. So let's say if it was shoreline residential, if you look at the zoning bylaw, there are specific zone requirements in section 6.4.5 that address freestanding decks. So I just want to provide that background first. In terms of how the planning department reviews building permit applications for shore decks, for ramps, for docks, generally speaking, the zoning bylaw does not recognize currently at this time shore decks. There's no mention of the shore deck in the zoning bylaw. There's no reference to it in terms of how the provisions will apply. So as a result, the planning department currently and in the past have permitted freestanding decks, as long as it meets the provisions of a freestanding deck, to exist up to 0 meters from the high water mark or the regulated water's edge. So if it's a waterfront property, the front lot line is considered the high water mark or regulated water's edge. So it can exist up to 0 meters to that front lot line, and it can be connected to a ramp that connects to a dock. We've noticed over the past several months and earlier than that, that there are numerous shore decks in township of Georgian Bay, and it creates this issue, as alluded to before, of how we will interpret it. And when it comes to new construction, when it comes to, let's say, there are no existing shore decks or ramps or docks that are currently existing on the property, the applicant will have to comply with the zoning bylaw. And as it currently sits, it can permit a freestanding deck as long as it complies with the zoning provisions. And then they can have a ramp that connects to a dock. If they have a current shore deck and they want to replace it like for like, they can do so as long as they don't change the size or the volume or the area of that shore deck. But currently, as we review building permit applications, we cannot permit new constructions that include shore deck. So a shore deck will basically override or overlap that front lot line, and will be between or above the high water mark and regulated water's edge, so it'll be on land, and it'll be below the high water mark and regulated water's edge, so it'll be into the water as well. So that's why we've taken this interpretation to permit that freestanding deck to attach to the ramp, which will attach to a dock. I do also want to mention that if you're looking to propose a shore deck, that a shore deck adds to the projection of the ramp dock system. And currently, as a zoning bylaw sits, the use of a shore deck is considered a dock. So if it's below the high water mark of regulated water's edge, it's considered a dock. If it's above, it's considered a freestanding deck. And as a result, the area that is below the water's edge or the high water mark, so it's in the water, that's considered a dock and adds to the maximum projection, or it's taken into account the maximum projection into the water. So I just want to keep that in mind in your discussion today, that depending on the location of the shore deck, it also adds into the maximum projection. It also adds into the other provisions, the max commutative area or the width. So that I just want that to be kept in mind when you review the shore deck and possible provisions that we can add to the zoning bylaw in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua. Next in sequence, I had Paul, and then Jack and Ian. Paul, go ahead, please.
I think Joshua just indicated the confusion that we have between shore decks and freestanding decks. I think I agree with Armin and Peter that these two structures, there's two different structures, a shore deck and a freestanding deck. They should both be defined separately, and they should be separated. Like as Armin says, if you have a shore deck, you may not be able to have a freestanding deck, and a freestanding deck should be further back from the water than obviously a shore deck. So I think that would make the regulations a lot clearer if we define what a shore deck is and the dimensions of it. That would be helpful. This whole issue is more of a Georgian Bay issue. In the inland lakes, we have the luxury of having somewhat steady water levels during the summertime, and we don't have a lot of these shore decks and freestanding decks down by the water. What some people do have, because of the water levels, if they have shoreline docks that take up much of the waterfront, and from that they may put on a perpendicular another deck. I mean another dock on top of that with a ramp in between. So there is different designs for docks inland and on the bay, but I think the whole idea of separating those two items would be really helpful.
Thank you. Jack.
Actually, Paul touched on one thing I was going to suggest, which is that the freestanding decks are a separate issue from the wharf or shore deck. They're not supposed to perform the same function. They're in a different location. So I think they should be separated. Freestanding decks are not the same as the wharfs or shore decks. And Paul mentioned that just ahead of me. As far as the width thing goes, I believe we've already got that covered. As far as the amount of shoreline you can occupy, that's 4.133, I think. So, and that covers the maximum cumulative width of docks, ramps, boat lifts, in-water boathouses, all the land-based structures. There are limits as to how wide you can go. So we've already got that width covered.
Okay, thank you. On to you, Ian, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'd like to just make a comment or a number of comments. One is, I guess to Dr. Aspel, there's nothing simple or easy with planning in Georgian Bay. I've been on the as director of planning in Cognition back in, I think it was 2012. I was appointed, then became president of the association. It's not easy. You're dealing with multiple communities up and down the shoreline with different expectations of how they want to preserve those shorelines. So I think we have to maybe move away from, we want consistency and make it easier for the planning department, but I don't think that is what I think the community's objectives were from the beginning. It was really looking at sort of how best to preserve those shorelines and the sort of natural sort of features of those shorelines. I would agree that I think there are opportunities or requirements to sort of add additional structures that would this interstitial sort of structure or wharf, as I think Jack sort of classified. I'm afraid to call anything a deck only because it adds sort of a conception that it is used for something other than just access from a dock to the shoreline. But as Armin pointed out, I think it really needs to be restricted in terms of its width and not sort of create this shoreline structure for deck chairs, umbrellas, stereos, etc. It really is, I think, just that connection. But we have to also look at sort of the extension and the limits in terms of the projection out into the waterway. I don't think we can just sort of carte blanche say you put a structure out and the dock ends where it ends. I think, if I'm not mistaken, in 2014, when we did have exceptionally low water levels, we did have, I think, just a sort of a temporary bylaw that allowed for extensions, new docks, but we did limit sort of the length of the dock based on once you achieved a certain water depth at the end of that dock, which I think is 1.2 meters or 1.6 meters. But I think we have to sort of recognize there is a process, and I think the planning process is not a bad process to follow. I think if we look at sort of small steps and hope we can address some of these issues that Armin is obviously sort of raising, specific to problems that his customers are seeing, issues that the planning department are trying to resolve. As I said, in the 14 years I've been on the association in position as president, director, and now just on the committee, planning committee, we have not had a single application in Cognition, other than one that was dealing really with the width of the dock. But we really have seen very little requirements for any changes to the current bylaws that would necessitate, I think, this discussion. So there may be some room to sort of tweak things a little bit, but I don't think we need to make sort of excessive changes to what we've got now, and maybe looking at this sort of wharf or this connection, but at the same time we're still limiting the length of that projection of wharf, ramp, etc., into the waterway. So that would be my sort of comments.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Joshua, you wanted to weigh in again?
Through you, Chair. I just want to clarify a certain matter related to the community of max width. So section 4.1.13.3 does limit the max cumulative width, but it's only for specific zone properties or specific properties in community associations. So I just want to make sure that that is clarified for you today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll go with Armin first and then Beth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Josh, I just wanted to refer back to your comments on your original comments there, where you said that you were allowing shore decks, or sorry, you're allowing freestanding decks to be 0 meters from the high water mark. That provision is in there, 4.1.12.3 under freestanding decks. It says under provision subsection 4, it says that they can be 0 meters from the high water mark. But if you read 5, it tells you that in Cog Machine, it has to be 5 meters back from the high water mark. And that's been my point all along. And I don't know how much clearer I can make it, but you know, if you go back 5 meters on a sloped shoreline where the shoreline starts to raise from the water's edge, then the structure, which is allowed to be 40 square meters, called a freestanding deck, if it's 5 meters back, chances are it's going to be a very obtrusive structure if it's on a sloped piece of shore, because visually you're going to have skirt boards on it, and you're, as a matter of the regulation, you're only allowed for it to be constructed in increments that are no more than 1.2 meters or 4 feet above grade. So if somebody wants to use up their 40 square meters and they're going higher than the 1.2 meters, they have to step it like bleachers or like a big set of stairs. So I don't think people like that idea, from my experience anyway. If you're trying to limit the massing, then the best way to do that is to solve this problem. And if you look at that provision under, 0.5, it does say that it's got to be 5 meters back. So anyway, just some comments, a little bit of a rebuttal to Ian's comments. And I think Dr. Espila, in his initial comments, said that the planning department is running into all kinds of issues interpreting the bylaw. They're having people come to them and they can't figure it out. And I would submit that some of these changes are required. We've had applications, and I know other contractors have had applications turned down recently. I don't think by Josh, but by his predecessors, where somebody wanted to connect a ramp from between a fixed dock and a floating dock. They wanted to use a hinged ramp to connect it, and it wasn't a permitted use. And if Josh is using, if there is an existing shore deck that's there, or a freestanding deck that was built before the bylaw precluded it from being right at the water's edge or cantilevering over the water's edge, and if you include the width of that shore deck or the depth of it as part of your dock allowance, your dock projection allowance, then you're losing whatever that is. If it's the deck is 16 feet deep from shore, then you're taking 16 feet right off of the permitted 66 feet that you can build the dock in Cog Machine. And 50 feet may not be enough in some cases to get to a depth of water that's sufficient to operate a boat. So this is why I'm suggesting that you leave the dock provisions the way they are. If Cog Machine wants them to be 66 feet long from the water's edge or the current water mark, that's fine. But I'm suggesting that to use Jack's term, a wharf is probably better than what my description was. But I think an additional wharf, not to be confused with the dock, but that a wharf provides connectivity to that dock and provides the required extension from the water's edge to a place where you can keep dry feet. Thank you.
Thank you, Armin. One of the things you were beginning to help us segue from docks into stairs, you brought that topic up, and I'm being encouraged to consider that part of the topic and as we had it in our agenda. But before I do, Beth, you had indicated an interest in weighing in on this topic.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. And Armin, thank you for your summary. It's kind of too bad that wasn't shared with the committee before. As Peter Fold said, we could have actually considered it. And certainly some examples or illustrations of the issues that you're having would have been helpful, for sure. As it relates to illustrations, I do share your concern about those illustrations not being part of the zoning bylaw. We did discuss that as a committee when bylaw 2014-75 was prepared. But we do see that the bylaw actually refers to the schedule. So it's not like they're totally being ignored. They are being referenced when somebody's trying to interpret a bylaw, because it says for interpretation, refer to such and such. So they're there. I don't deny that maybe some of them need to be clarified, and I think I agree with you on that. I go back to Peter Fold's initial comments about what the communities are concerned about. And I think it's about all of the communities up and down the coast are about protecting as much of the natural shoreline as possible. And that's probably why you're seeing in Cognachines, for example, and I'm not sure whether the other communities are set back 5 meters from the high water mark, but that was the issue with this massive dock on the shore that becomes a platform to attach a ramp to attach a dock on which everybody has umbrellas and all the 10 red chairs on the dock. That was a concern. And so while you're suggesting that maybe some of that freestanding deck can be used as an attachment to a ramp in which to access a dock, perhaps it is something to consider, but it certainly would have to be limited. We currently today have a maximum ramp width in our bylaw, so it wouldn't need to be any wider than the maximum ramp width, if that's the purpose, is really just to have a solid shore structure to attach a ramp to a dock to. And I know Joshua mentioned that this would become part of the projection. I have a question on that, because when I was reviewing the bylaw, and it would have been helpful as part of this report to actually say what each community has, because as you know, we're all very different. What I found is that there is a general provision that talks about a 20-meter maximum dock length and a maximum 26 in dock and ramp. But as I went through all the specific exceptions to that, really, when I look at SRI 1, it's 15, SRI 15, SRI to SR 5 is a maximum dock length of 15. It's 10 in 6 Mile Lake, and it's 20 in Cognachines. So I couldn't even figure out who actually, because all the zones are covered as exceptions, who actually is permitted a 26 meter projection. But what this tells me in looking through this is all of these communities, if they're talking about maximum 10, 15, and even 20 meter projections, I think the last thing they're going to want to see is a shore deck that pushes that well beyond those limits. And if you talk about an attachment, Armin, you used the word littoral zone. I think you were considering that maybe a shore platform can extend into the water into that littoral zone to access a ramp. I think there's other considerations that would need to be taken into account. The sensitivity of the lake bottom, is it a wetland? Is it weedy? Is it fish habitat? So there are broader implications to that. And quite honestly, I mean, I did speak with a member of the Committee of Adjustment before this meeting because I wanted to find out, have there been many applications before the Committee of Adjustment for this? And the answer was only that one. It was the Withers application, and it was related to a wider dock and their permanent residents. So maybe they deserve to have something different. I think in the end of the day, there are definitely unique circumstances that need to be considered. And because not every shoreline is the same. I'm very fortunate, but I know others are not. And that is why we have the minor variance process. So if there are unique circumstances that somebody needs to get access, then that should be dealt with through the minor variance process, because to open this up and start changing definitions and adding shore decks that then change every community's maximum dock projection is a much bigger, wider consultative process involved. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Beth. Dr. Spilla, you wanted to weigh in?
Yes, thank you, Chair Hazelton. Just in the name of time, I think we've had some excellent feedback from the committee today, and I am grateful for that. I've been taking notes, and our team's been taking some notes. I'm seeking clarification on the committee, as perhaps you work towards a motion here. Am I hearing correctly from the committee that they would like administration to look at some additional definitions, particularly for shore deck and wharf, I just want to make sure I'm hearing that correctly and understand if that's the intent of the committee, and looking for guidance on this. Thank you.
If I could, Bill, go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I guess as I've been listening, I've been thinking, there's reference to problem situations. Armin mentioned, refusals. I'm reading into that, refusals on the basis that it doesn't meet the bylaw requirements. As Beth just mentioned, there is a minor variance process. So I'm assuming that a lot of people don't walk away completely. They come through the minor variance process. Some solution is proposed, some solution is evaluated. Something is done through the minor variance process. So I guess I'm a bit disappointed that we don't kind of have some statistics about how many of these things, how typically these things arise and how often they come through the minor variance process, and what are the solutions that are deemed to be reasonable through that process and are approved as such. And wouldn't that help us kind of guide us and get the true sense of the scope of the problem and what are the solutions we've found? And if we're thinking, okay, that's too many coming through the minor variance process, because I would agree with Beth, we can't sort of encompass every possible exception with bylaw and eliminate the minor variance process. So some amount of things still going through that process for exceptional situations makes sense. But, if we're getting a lot of them of a particular type, then it makes sense to try and frame those. If it makes sense, let's say we think we should amend the bylaw so this kind of reasonable solution is predefined in the bylaw in some way. But what I'm feeling is like, where is that data? As your planner indicated, you get a lot of applications. What's really happening at the end of the process? What are the solutions you're coming up with? And wouldn't that help us, guide us into how to frame or reframe the bylaws? I'm just kind of hearing anecdotal stuff, a little examples like, what's the quantitative stuff? Can we, is the data there? We can go back through our variance records and come up with some, some numbers and specifics. Anyway, thank you.
Ian, did you want to weigh in again, or?
Yeah, just quickly, I just would agree with Bill. As I said, in Cognizine, we've not seen any real applications that is sort of pushing the limits or looking for exceptions to the current zoning bylaws. We've got, and we have every application goes through the association with over 600 property owners. So I think, as Bill said, let's see the numbers. Let's see that sort of quantitative data and then move from there. But why throw the baby out with the bathwater when it seems things are working now? Thanks.
Peter?
Yeah, I think I agree with Bill and Ian. Before I would be prepared to recommend to staff that they come up with a new definition, I'd like more information on where the problem is. If I understood Jason correctly, planning staff is already permitting a freestanding deck up to 0 meters from the high water mark, except in Cognizine, I guess, and permitting a dock to be attached to that. So I'm not sure where the problem is, and I don't think we should be fixing something that isn't broken. But I'm certainly prepared to hear more from staff as to what they perceive as broken. And then if that's the case, then we can look at solutions.
And thank you. I need to move on a little bit here. But before we leave this topic here, what I think I'm hearing in the way of a bit of a consensus is that there are images in the zoning bylaw that make it a challenge for the planning department and applicants to easily understand the bylaws and bring forward applications that comply with the zoning bylaws. And so it may be useful to have the planning committee recommend to council that they direct staff to tweak and tune up those images and make them more accurate, more effective, and perhaps include more so that we have a clear understanding. I think that, and I don't know if Sydney, if you have and what I sent you isn't exactly what I just said, but perhaps you have some other words that might get us there. I think the other thing, if I can, just to summarize what I've heard is there may be an interest in entertaining this concept of a shore deck or a wharf or whatever. But again, that's not a simple, two-word scenario that we look at. And I think that we should be receiving kind of much more information with examples to consider before we go down that path. So Sydney has, be it resolved.
Mr. Chair, if I may interrupt, if we could add to the proposed motion on screen that this be done as part of the waterfront policy review.
Fine.
Thank you.
Any comments on that, or are people okay with it? Not okay with it? Okay. And do we want, Bill? Yes. Oh,
Yeah, sorry. I guess I'd like to add to that resolution that that staff be requested to compile some data from variances that would shed more light on the scope of issues and the solutions that have been identified to assist us in refining the bylaws, something of that nature.
So Sydney, if I could offer a couple of words here, I think what we're trying to get at here is the zoning bylaw defines the current constraints, and it may not be easy to figure out what those are. Maybe the diagrams will help, but if the general understanding is that an OP and a zoning bylaws provide guidance on what we want, then only the exceptions are items that come to the Committee of Adjustment for consideration. What Bill's asking for is, are we having, what are these statistics of the items that are coming to Committee of Adjustment that are trying to break out of the constraints in the current zoning bylaws, and that would guide us on how important changing these bylaws might be. Peter.
Yeah, it seems to me that as a committee, we're asking the planning department to come back to us with a little more background information and an indication of where they perceive the problems are. And following that, we may have a further discussion about whether we need to make changes to the bylaw and maybe recommendations for changes. And it seems to me premature to be changing the diagrams. If we're going to be making changes to the bylaw, we should settle what the bylaw is going to say first, and then adjust the diagrams to comply with what we come up with.
Can I hear Sydney? You're on mute.
Sorry, I was just talking to Karen. She's sitting beside me. I have a resolution on screen here. I don't know if we want to pass a separate resolution in terms of the data for minor variance applications, and then the sketches for the zoning bylaw can be a separate resolution. I don't know if this is what you're getting at.
I think it is. Peter, did you want to add anything to that, or does that sort of encompass what you're looking for?
I think that captures what Bill and Ian and I have been suggesting.
Okay, I'll just pause for a second, Director Aspola.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering if we, so the second resolution, this one looks pretty clear. The wording looks pretty good. If I just suggest we add all of this work's being done in reference to the waterfront policy review. So if we can just add that to the second resolution, similar to the first. I'm wondering if we can refine the wording a bit on the first resolution. Just give Sydney a moment here. So I just want to make sure that we're accurately capturing what the committee is recommending here. So I'm just reading the resolution to myself right now. Okay, so what I'm thinking is that be it resolved that planning committee recommends to council that as part of the waterfront policy review, administration and I'm looking for the action word here.
Prepare and produce.
Yep, or update, maybe a simple word.
Sure.
Update the images in the zoning bylaw to assist in the understanding of how to interpret the language, or to assist in the understanding of how to interpret the text of the zoning bylaw. And then the second part to the resolution would be, oh, actually, I think that would cover it.
Sorry, Chris, can you just repeat that one more time?
Sure, Sydney. To assist in the understanding of the text of the zoning bylaw. And I think we can add a period after that and make it full, and then delete the rest. I believe that captures the intention.
Anyone want to comment, weigh in on that? Does that seemingly reflect the things we've been talking about? Okay, so can we put those two up? First of all, can I have a mover of this one? Got Jack, and seconded by Ian, and all in favor? Or is there, okay, all in favor, good. And Sydney, the next one. And can I have a mover? Peter, and seconder Bill, and all in favor? Excellent, thank you. Sydney, you have another resolution that we have not talked about, and this is where, whether it's new business or whatever is challenging, but could you take the resolution that I've provided you and put it up on the screen so that we can look at it? It's, in my mind, it's new business, but since we don't have a new business topic, we'll just consider it recommendations to council. So one of the things that, if I can weigh in on this, one of the things that I learned this week is that there's new legislation that has come down from the province, and it may have a significant impact on our township and timings of applications and other things. And that there is a kind of a term, a complete application, that may be an extremely important topic for us to weigh in on and refine. And I have already received some information from Beth, and including she's already received an initial legal opinion on Bill 109 and some of the relevant impacts of this. There's lots of them, but I think from my conversations with Beth, it sounds like the definition of a complete application is probably the most critical one. And can I ask you, Beth, to offer a few more comments on this?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And in my role in the development business, I do get regular updates from BUILD, which is the global organization of developers, builders, planners, in fact, and even in the GTA. And this bill has been given royal assent. And quite honestly, I'm a little surprised that the township didn't have this on their radar, because there are some extreme implications, as the chair has noted, to our township. And just to describe the one that I was concerned about it when I read about it, and I can say from the urban development perspective and my cohorts, they're absolutely delighted with this legislation. I have a subdivision in Caledon that took 8 years to be draft approved, which is one of the reasons why they've introduced this. And basically it's incentives to get municipalities to deal with applications for zoning, OPA, and site plan applications within the designated timeframe in the Planning Act. And that incentive is, and for those that are not familiar, the Planning Act designated timeframes for a zoning bylaw amendment application is 90 days. For zoning and OPA is 120 days, and for site plan is 60 days. But what it says is, if a municipality hasn't made a decision on the 91st day on a zoning bylaw application, it has to refund the applicant 50% of the fees. And there's a sliding scale up to the fact that on the zoning, if the township hasn't dealt with it within 180 days, it's a total refund to the applicant. So, and there's that sliding scale, 50, 75, 100%. And unfortunately, because, and it really, this shouldn't apply to a municipality such as ours, where we're certainly very unique. We've got a Georgian-based UNESCO Biosphere Reserve across our shoreline, a sensitive shoreline. We've got the seasonability aspect of actually doing our site inspections and various things. So I think at this point, the only way that I see our township is going to be able to address this is really through damage control, in a way to make sure that our planning staff has sufficient time to review the applications. And one thing I have noticed in our township is, and I don't believe I've ever seen a notice of the complete application issued to an applicant, but it is a requirement. And to have a complete application, you have to have satisfied a checklist of a number of different reports to support an application before the clock starts ticking on this time frame. And that's going to be very essential for our township. And it's probably going to entail, or I know it will entail, having to properly define terms of reference for fish habitat assessments, environmental impact assessments, because those assessments are needed to actually commence the review. So I would like this committee to have authority through a direction from council to start talking about what comprises a complete application, because that's the only thing that's going to be the saving grace here in the township, to make sure that it's not reviewing applications for free. And application fees are supposed to be on a cost recovery basis, as we all know. So there's a lot to it. And I just would ask if we can have a motion. You've already drafted something there, Mr. Chair, with the secretary, is getting council direction to us to start talking about this, because there are implications for sure to our municipality. And it may not have been, others may not even have known this. This may be the first time they're learning it today.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I know this week was the first time I learned it, and Dr. Espella was provided the opportunity earlier this week to give me a little snapshot of it. And so now I kind of think that we need to scramble a little bit based on the way you framed it there. Dr. Espella, would you like to weigh in on this?
Thank you, Chair Hazelton. I would like to assure the committee, all members of the committee, that the planning department has been following Bill 109 through its entire development, and the suggestion that we haven't, I'm shocked to hear that. We are, as you may be aware, royal assent was obtained on the 14th of April, which was 15 days ago from today. And it is on our radar, and my intention is to bring forward a report on it based on discussion that I've had with a number of my planning colleagues throughout the province, and a number of legal interpretations that the planning department has obtained through our regular sources. I'd like to assure the committee that we are very up to speed on Bill 109 and the More Homes for Everyone Act. So just to clarify any confusion that may exist with that, we are in an excellent position, and we will be bringing a report forward. I'll be the author of it with the intention of it going forward to council in June at Planning Council. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add, this happened all very quickly. There is no question. It would have been hard to respond and get submissions in time, particularly given schedules of council meetings and preparations of reports. And this is about re-election. There's no question. And so whether or not we could have even changed the course, to your comment, Dr. Askell, I mean, probably not. Maybe even having a submission wouldn't have had an impact because they were on a path. So I think I'm just trying to look to the future to see how can we manage it as it relates particularly to our municipality. And that's really what my comment was to the chair when I passed some information on to him about this bill.
Thank you. Bill.
Sorry, yeah, I support certainly the resolution. I think we definitely need to review what we define as a complete application. And, you know, just in terms of good planning, I think it makes good sense for a municipality to be clear about what they need in conjunction with an application. There's nothing more frustrating to, you know, you ask for 5 things, and when they finish those 5 things, you say, well, here's number 6 and here's number 7. So, you know, I think that's good practice generally, and not just in relation to this bill. And also, I think that extends to, you know, being clear about the terms of reference for the studies that we're requesting, because, you know, I think all too often you say, okay, well, we need a fish habitat study, and some consultant is hired and slaps something between covers and say, there's your fish habitat study, but it doesn't, it needs to address the criteria and be done in a manner that meets the requirement of the municipality and good planning and so on. So I think, you know, starting with this, defining what's constitute a complete application, and even going beyond that, to be addressing the terms of reference for the things that are required is all pretty important. So yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that.
Thank you, Bill. Beth, you wanted to say more?
Yep. Sorry, I just wanted to add one thing, and that is just because of the unique character of our shoreline. One of the things that's always been an issue when applications come forward in the winter is how do you properly assess if there's environment for spawning for fish in the frontage on this property, or there's species at risk. So I think what this does, because I've heard a number of people express that, I've heard members of council express, you know, how do we deal with an application coming forward in the middle of winter? What the municipality could do, and depending on the nature of the application, say a site visit is essential. That is, you know, we need to know the unique characteristics of this shoreline. Is this an appropriate application for development? So that is just one of the tools in the toolbox that the municipality could use and make that part of a complete application process before the clock starts ticking. And that'll be something for a future discussion, but that was just one of the thoughts.
Okay, thank you. We're getting close to the end of the time. Sydney, can I ask you to share your screen again, put the resolution back up so that everybody can read it again? And I would also ask for a mover and a seconder. Dr. Espelli, you wanted to weigh in on this as well?
I'd just like to chime in with regard to the proposed motion for our discussion topics at the May Planning Committee agenda. Jason Farragon and I and Jason's team are working on the waterfront policy review. we're about to kick off our public consultation on the review, and we're already starting to receive feedback from people who are volunteering it. We'd like to propose that one of the topics be that we discuss with the committee what we're hearing from the people of our community at the May meeting.
I think that would be excellent, and we certainly can, I think, easily accommodate 2 topics on that meeting. So I would welcome that as being one of them, and I think this, based on what we're hearing, this is an ultra important topic, and I'm not sure that any one of us has all the answers, and I think an opportunity for discussion will bring great value to the township.
Super.
Can I have a mover for this resolution? That would be Beth, and seconder Bill Winterhall. Any more discussion on the resolution? All those in favor? And it is carried. Thank you. And Sydney, I do have a big enough screen where I can see all the hands, all the faces, even with your screen sharing. Okay. And Sydney, you disappeared. Are you? You're back. Okay. Okay, it is a 11:55, and we don't have any new items on our agenda. So unless there is some comments that someone would like to offer, I would like to move on to the motion for adjournment. Beth?
Sorry to ask, Mr. Chair, but at the last meeting, what we had discussed were also the priority items that were assigned to us by council as this committee to provide input to, which is we've expected today, but when will they come forward to this committee? If we're just dealing with perhaps 109 and complete application next meeting, can we have a go forward list?
So as our acting CEO pointed out, the items that we will be discussing will be discussed in conjunction with me, and I've heard what you've asked for, as have our planning department and our clerk's department. So we will try to get that to have some coverage on our next agenda. Okay, any more discussion? All those in favor? And that resolution is carried.
Can I have a
And-
mover and a seconder for that resolution?
Oh, Bill for, sorry, the resolution was to adjourn. Sorry. And Bill moved it, and who's going to second it? Jack is going to second it, and we've already voted, so we are adjourned at 11:57.